For the overwhelming majority of us, we tend to lead pretty monotonous and uneventful lives. We have boring jobs and stick to a pretty mundane routine. Oftentimes, we wonder what it would be like to swap lives with another person who seems to have a more exhilarating or successful life than our own. We imagine what it would be like to trade places with that superstar athlete, the talented actor, or the famous rapper. What if we got our wish, but instead of switching lives with someone rich, accomplished, or smart, we swapped lives with a vicious serial killer? Hey guys, it's Hyde, and welcome to my review of Freaky, one of the newer additions to comedy horror. So let's not waste any more time and jump right into the plot of this movie. Millie Kessler is your everyday typical high school student. She lives with her mother Coral, who is always on the lookout for her next glass of wine, and her older police officer sister Charlene. They live in the small town of Blissfield, where Millie attends Blissfield High School, where she is frequently picked on and tormented by students and teachers alike. Although not very popular, she still does manage to have two friends, Nyla and Josh, who are able to make her high school existence a little more tolerable. Millie also has a crush on popular high school classmate Booker, who she is pretty sure doesn't even know she exists. But the town of Blissfield holds a horrible secret, that an insane killer known as the Blissfield Butcher has been murdering the townspeople for decades and is yet to be captured. During one of his brutal assaults, the Butcher steals an ancient Aztecian dagger that he intends to use on his next victim. Unfortunately for Millie, this victim is her. In the morning after the attack, Millie wakes to find herself in the body and life of the Butcher, and he finds himself in the body of Millie. This does not stop the Butcher from his murder spree, however, and the people closest to Millie are put in immediate danger. Millie, now in the body of the Butcher, must convince those she knows that she is actually the real Millie and has to stop the Butcher from using her body to commit more killings and ultimately get her body back. When I first saw the trailer for this movie, my first thought was that this is going to be exactly like the movie Freaky Friday, which is probably the most famous body swap movie of all time, and that this was just going to be a horror version of that. And my first impression was that this movie was probably going to be pretty dumb. But it didn't take very long until I realized that if this was written well enough and acted well enough, there is actually a lot of potential here. It was also obvious that this movie had pretty high production quality, and with that comes some pretty high expectations. Fortunately, this movie didn't waste the resources it had and made a very fun and engaging film. One of the biggest strengths of this movie was that it was very funny, and as a comedy horror movie, it has to be. There is nothing worse than when a movie tries to be really funny and fails miserably. That's a major death sentence for any movie. But Freaky is actually very amusing, and even at times clever. The comedy ranges from playful to ridiculous to slapstick, and it all blends together very nicely. I mean, watching Vince Vaughn parade around like an emotional teenage girl was absolutely hilarious. But one minor criticism I have about the humor is at times it could be somewhat juvenile, equivalent to what one might expect to find brilliantly written on a bathroom stall in a men's restroom. Why they chose to include these immature jokes is beyond my comprehension, and I think that anyone who has elevated their maturity level past high school will probably roll their eyes at these antics. But these childish jokes are sparse, and their limited presence doesn't do enough damage to ruin what is otherwise a delightful and hilarious movie. Additionally, the acting from everyone was very solid, maybe even outstanding, especially from the leads Millie and the Butcher, played by Kathyrn Newton and Vince Vaughn respectively. Each of them had to play not only one role, but two, and the two roles were so completely on the opposite side of the spectrum from one another, and both were able to pull that off, which isn't an easy thing to do. And while their performances are obviously due their praise, the supporting cast deserves recognition as well. I mean, the characters Josh and Nyla were so likable as Millie's loyal friends. And even the prick teacher and the mean girl, while not likable, stood out and gave me great satisfaction when they finally got what they deserved. One of the dangers of making a horror comedy, particularly when the comedy is done so well, is that the horror elements can be overshadowed or almost altogether abandoned. And while Freaky is undoubtedly not scary, it never lets you forget that this is not just a comedy, but a horror movie as well. The effects are fun enough to appeal to a wide audience, yet graphic enough to excite even the most jaded gorehound. There are table saws, chainsaws, and various other sharp objects that lead to some pretty epic and memorable kills. It's no easy task to apply enough blood and violence to attract gore enthusiasts and still be restrained enough to not go over the top. It's a very fine line to walk, and Freaky is able to do it perfectly. All of these things make this movie very enjoyable, but there are a couple of things that this movie did that I wish it didn't. One is a love story between Booker and Millie. It's extremely typical and never develops into anything more than a reciprocated secret crush. And while the thought of puppy love that begins as shy admiration from afar and doing little things like leaving poems in lockers might appeal to a younger crowd, to an older audience it can be melodramatic and stale. The other thing this movie does that I didn't really get was that this movie has two endings, and not in the way you might be thinking, like a DVD or Blu-ray release that might have two full versions of the movie, but each with a different ending. No, Freaky just has two endings, which I didn't understand. Because when I saw what I believed to be the actual ending, I felt that it was a satisfying conclusion to the film. And then, all of a sudden, for unknown reasons, this movie was just like, nah, hold up, this is the real ending. And though it isn't any worse than what I thought was the actual ending the first time, it just wasn't needed, and ultimately left me wondering why they did it in the first place. However, the things about this movie that make it so fun and enjoyable far outweigh those smaller concerns. This movie definitely has all the signs of becoming a contemporary horror comedy cult classic, up there with others like Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, Murder Party, and Deathgasm. That's very high praise, and it's well earned. Honestly, Freaky is a great way to wrap up what has otherwise been a tough year for everyone, and could end up being my favorite movie of the year. So do yourself a favor, grab your friends, order some pizza, and check this one out. I don't think you will be disappointed. And that's going to be it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to leave a comment about the movie or the review. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will hope you'll join me next time right here on Hyde's Horror. Thanks for watching, guys.